We'll give it just one more minute. Okay, let's get started. Thank you all for being here again today. For those of you who've been here all week, I so appreciate you taking the time to spend some time with me this week and learn a little bit more about supporting individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome. Today, we're going to be talking about providing support with respect and dignity. And again, I'd like to preface this with lots of what we talk about in this particular training is going to apply across the board to anyone that you are supporting. However, the information gathered from individuals with developmental disabilities that I talk about here did come specifically from people with Prader-Willi syndrome. So let's get started. Today's objectives are going to be to define dignity and to really walk away, hopefully, with an understanding of the dignity of risk versus the duty of care. And this comes up very, very often when supporting individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome because of human rights committees really struggling to understand all the complexities of Prader-Willi syndrome and the restrictions that many, many people end up needing really do violate most, many of the rights that individuals should have. So providers are really struggling with that dignity of risk versus the duty of care. So I'm hoping to give you guys some understanding, some tips, some food for thought that you can go back to your teams at your agencies with the individuals that you support, their potential guardians if they have them, or family members, anybody in their natural support circle, and really talk through these things with them. Make decisions together as a team. Okay, so I believe this definition is from Webster, and I'm sorry if I don't remember specifically, but dignity of care means the kind of care and support in any setting which supports and promotes and does not undermine a person's self-respect regardless of difference. It's a bit of a mouthful there. Dignity consists of many overlapping aspects. It involves respect, privacy, autonomy, and self-worth. And we're going to talk a little bit about that self-worth later in this presentation. To treat somebody with dignity is to treat them as being of a worth, to being worthy in a way that is respectful of them and as valued individuals. One of the things I think we forget is we think about respect and how we would receive it, but what I might find respectful and somebody supporting me might look different than you. So when we're talking respect, we want to think about it from the perspective of the person we're supporting. Now, I'd like you guys just to take a few minutes and to put into the chat, what is your definition of dignity? How do you guys define dignity? Being able to make your own decisions about your life. Great. It's a great example, Lori. Anyone else? Take a risk, guys. It's okay. There's no wrong answers here. I asked some individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome, treating people how they want to be treated. Great, thank you. So I asked some people with Prader-Willi syndrome how they define dignity, and here were some of their answers. Treating people with respect, listening. So when they feel that they're being listened to, when people respond to them, as soon as they ask a question or ask for assistance with something. When they feel like they're being put at the center of the care rather than a byproduct of what's happening around them. Maintaining confidentiality. Someone said dignity is about being treated as an individual, respect and compassion. Being given information when they ask for it. Asking what their specific wants and needs are. And then my absolute favorite is not telling parents everything. So some examples of this might be when someone tells you that perhaps they have a crush on somebody that they work with, or that they really got frustrated during their home visit when mom or dad said or did this or that. You know, as providers, we try to make sure parents know what's going on, and especially guardians. I think that there's a different level of information that we share with guardians than we do natural supports, but not everything needs to be shared. Not everything falls under the umbrella of guardianship. So keeping that in mind. So if it's not health or safety or something that you have a duty to share, take a thought, take a few seconds to just think, do I need to share this with their parents? Does this need to be shared with the whole team? Or is this person just telling me something that they trust me with this information, but it's not super important, it's not going to affect anything? So dignity and care. Lack of respect for an individual's dignity and care can take many forms. It may differ from person to person. So not only did I ask people what dignity was to them, I also asked them, when did they feel that their dignity wasn't being respected? And these were some of their answers. When they were feeling neglected or as if they were being ignored while somebody was providing care. So this is an important thing for when we're providing a personal direct care for somebody. Talk with them. Don't just go through the motions. Think for a second if you've ever had maybe an injury, or for any of the birthing persons in the room, if while giving birth, the nurses and the providers there supporting you, if they didn't speak to you and just went about their medical duties during that time, how would that feel? Being treated more as an object than a person. When staff make it obvious that they are paid to be with them in public. This one came up over and over and over again in talking with people. I think this is something that people might do and not even know that they're doing it. When you're out in an event with somebody, you're in public with them somewhere outside of their home, walk beside them or behind them, not in front of them. Talk to them the way you would talk to a friend if you were at the mall. Don't wear your name badge in a way that is so obvious that you're being paid. If somebody has the ability to be making any sort of financial transactions, they're purchasing something, please let them do it rather than you doing it for them. Really look at every step of what you do with somebody and think, is there a way that I can pull back my support here and just appear as if we're friends rather than I'm paid to be with them? This one didn't come up repeatedly, but I thought it was a pretty profound example. So feeling like their, again, privacy wasn't being respected during personal care. And the person said that rather than being offered the opportunity to physically be supported to go in to use the bathroom, or their wheelchair being transferred into the wheelchair to then go to the bathroom, they're forced to use a commode in their bedroom. Now, commodes are great tools when needed, but if they're not needed, I think we should take a step back and think, is this for the convenience of us, or is this for the safety or at the request of the person who's using it? Dignity, human rights, and our responsibilities. So human rights belong to everyone, and we all know that. They're the basic rights that we all have simply because we're human, regardless of who we are, what we look like, where we live, what our jobs are, what color we are, what gender we are. They belong to everyone. And human rights should be at the center of everything we do in this field. Now, we need to focus on quality of life and individual outcomes rather than needs and processes. And I say this not to say we shouldn't be thinking about those things, or we should disregard the processes and employer protocols, that sort of thing. But sometimes those processes and protocols that we put in place, and I'm guilty of this myself in my previous career, doesn't always match up with somebody's desires, their individual personal outcomes, what they want to do with their life, or how to get there to accomplish the things that they'd like to do. Human rights represent all the things that are important to us as human beings. Being able to choose how we live our lives, how we're being treated with dignity and respect. Human rights are based on a number of core values, including fairness, respect, equality, dignity, and autonomy. So I want you to think for a second, not just about how we live our lives, but where. How many of the people that you support with Prader-Willi syndrome or not had a choice in their now residential placement? Did they have a choice in who their roommates were going to be, or if they were going to have roommates? Did they have the option of choosing whether they share a room or they don't share a room? Do they have a choice in who helps them with any of the personal care support that they may need? In most situations, the answer is no. The person with Prader-Willi syndrome or the intellectual developmental disability isn't the one who necessarily gets to choose these things. The team chooses them with their best interest in mind. And I'm not suggesting that they all disagree and that they don't necessarily want that placement or they don't want those particular roommates. But how often are they even asked? Dignity, respect, and PWS. So, nothing about me without me, one of my favorite quotes. I feel very strongly that anytime the team gets together to discuss an individual, to discuss their plans, to discuss their needs, that person should be invited to sit at that table. They should have the option to say, no, proceed without me. But it shouldn't happen without an invitation to have them join. Now, I also know that there are some people who just can't handle that. I mean, none of us, I think, want to sit in a room where people talk about our faults, our struggles, our challenges. It's not really comfortable. So how do we then bring them into that conversation if they don't want to be in the meeting itself? We talk to them. Talk to them before, go back to them after, but make sure that their wants, desires, needs, thoughts, the good and the bad, are included and that they are the forefront of those discussions. So diet and nutrition. This is a rub very often for individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome. They don't want to be able to, or to have their calories reduced because they had gained some weight. Where this is a struggle because with responsibility, or with power comes responsibility. So we want them involved, and there's a responsibility of being involved, but they need to be able to make informed decisions around things. And what we know, if you participated in the first presentation about the medical overview, is hyperphagia is not something that an individual with Prader-Willi syndrome can control. So when it comes to diet and nutrition, should they be involved in what they eat, the meal planning, the preparation? Sure, if they can truly handle it. And what I mean by handle it is if you sit down to do meal planning with somebody and you see increased signs that they are agitated or feeling anxious. So maybe their speech pattern changes, or they visibly are upset, they start crying, or they're hitting the table, or they're tearing up the menu, then they may not be able to handle that level of involvement yet. What they might be able to do, though, is when it comes to making the meal, say lunch is a sandwich, you give them the bread, you give them the measured out amount of either lunch meat or tuna fish or whatever it's going to be in the sandwich, and the condiments, and they assemble it. And once they're able to do that and are doing it well without any signs of anxiety, then you increase the amount of involvement. There was a period of time where, about Prader-Willi syndrome, let's keep in mind that the syndrome didn't get a name until the 1950s and didn't get its first treatment until 2000. So how we respond to Prader-Willi syndrome has really changed over the last 70 years. But the practice used to be that they could have no involvement at all for fear of anxiety. That doesn't feel very respectful. It's not treating people with dignity. And this is that dignity of risk. So how much risk can you take to help them grow in this area? Activities of daily living. So we talked about constipation and skin picking and some of those things that people with PWS might engage in. And very often the responses in the treatment plan for these things are skin checks for skin picking, or checking the toilet after somebody uses the bathroom. These things are a little bit embarrassing. Think about how embarrassed we would be if somebody that, we're not intimate with, we don't have a mutually loving relationship with, asks us to take off all of our clothes or comes in while we're in the shower to take a look at our body. It's embarrassing. We want to do that in a very respectful way. And I think very often of situations where perhaps you go for a massage and only the part of your body that the masseuse is touching is exposed. Can you do a skin check that way? Rather than going in and checking the toilet, can you teach an individual to use the Bristol chart and report their bowel status in a confidential way? This does not mean yelling through the house, hey, I had a medium BM, or Bobby, did you have a BM today? Let's avoid doing those things. Community inclusion. So most of our programs are in neighborhoods. The houses are in a neighborhood. Maybe there's 2 or 3 houses in the town that support people with developmental disabilities. Just because you live in a community doesn't mean you're part of a community. So how can you look at ways to help people with PWS and again, other disabilities access their community differently, be a part of their community? Is it, really looking at the things that are of interest to them? So let's say somebody really loves tennis. Is there a local tennis club they can go to where they can play tennis with other people in the neighborhood? If they're particularly religious or have a desire to attend a specific church, what does that look like? Can you help them develop natural supports in that church so that staff can provide less support in the community? Maybe provides a little bit of that support. Look at the ways that you can help people actually be a part of the community rather than just living in it, if that's something they want to do. Money management is one that comes up quite a bit. So money can represent food for individuals with PWS. You can use money to buy food. You can use money to order food off the internet. Let me tell you, Grubhub and DoorDash and all of these really convenient food delivery services are great for those of us who live very, very busy lives. But it has opened up a whole new world for people with Prader-Willi syndrome to access food and be unsafe. I know of stories where individuals have used these services and had food delivered to their bedroom windows. So not only are they getting food that could potentially have just devastating health risks for them, in some cases, they might be meeting individuals or sneaking out with individuals that they meet in these situations that maybe aren't the best. They might not have this individual's best interest in mind. I strongly encourage all agencies to create a money management assessment, and it can look different across states based on your regulations and agencies, but do people understand the value of money? Can they tell the differences between coins and dollar bills? Do they understand that a debit card or a credit card does not necessarily mean unlimited funds? What is their skill level? And from there, how can you increase their skills? How can you work on that with them without giving them free range to money that they're then spending on food and going above their caloric intake and putting themselves at a health risk? Ways that I've seen people be successful with this is taking the risk. Somebody has demonstrated that they have the skill. They can go into a store. The staff can hang out outside, whether it's in a parking lot or a mall. Outside of the store, the person goes in, they make their transaction, they come out. When they get home, they take a look at the receipt and the change, and they go through it all together. If food wasn't purchased, great. Then we can move on and maybe do this again or with a larger dollar amount. If it hasn't, then we go take a step back. Now staff are going to have to go in, maybe not stand directly beside you when this happens, but they'll be there. This is a piece that is so unique to each individual you're supporting and changes all the time. So nothing about me without me. And we talked about this, but again, decisions shouldn't be made without somebody there, unless they choose not to be there. And I think about school settings where very often the student does not come to the IEP meeting. And from a federal perspective, the IDEA doesn't require them to be there until they turn, I believe it's 16, when we start having to legally discuss transition from school to secondary education or whatever that might look like. I don't know about you, but I know 10 and 11-year-olds who absolutely have input. I know 7-year-olds who have input about their day, about how they're feeling. They should be allowed to come in and discuss those things. So as a field, this is an area that I think we have made great progress in the adult disability space, but we still have so much more that we can do. The person you're supporting is the most important person in the team. And sometimes this is hard for parents to hear. But parents aren't more important than the person you're supporting. The parents' wants and wishes and needs for their child are certainly important, but they don't discount the person's wants, wishes, and needs. And that could be a really tough conversation to have with parents. And decisions should not be made about care without informed consent. Now, there's lots of assessments out there where you can determine somebody's capacity of somebody's capacity in lots of different areas. I'm not a big fan of over-testing people, but I do think we need to do some more casual assessments to really understand somebody's ability to make informed consent prior to us either making those decisions for them or allowing them to take a risk that they don't understand. So, diet and nutrition. One of the ways that you can support somebody with respect and dignity is by not eating in front of them. Please don't walk into somebody, if you if you work in a group home and there's an individual with Prader-Willi syndrome who lives there, please don't walk in drinking a soda from McDonald's. Don't order food to be delivered to the program that they can't have. You guys are absolutely entitled to eat and drink while you are working. But you can either eat and drink what they're drinking, or wait until they're out of sight. Can you take a break? Again, I know this is not always something that can happen in the residential world, but if you can tag out with a coworker for a few minutes, can you sit in your car and eat or drink something? Can you be in a locked kitchen? And if not, can you just eat or drink when they are? Providing food security is providing support with respect and dignity. The other thing I think that sometimes we forget that we need to be aware of is perfumes, gum, lotions, air fresheners. They all have scents. So we may not think they smell like food. You certainly don't want to buy the ones that do. Please don't buy the candy apple air fresheners or cotton candy. They obviously smell and can be triggering for people with PWS. But there was a time, I don't know if it's still the case, but Victoria's Secret made a lip gloss line that had different flavors: coffee, chocolate, caramel, and they were those shades of brown, but they also smelled like that and tasted like that. So staff, thinking they were being very, very sweet, and the gesture was sweet, had bought these lip glosses as gifts for all the women who lived in this particular group home. And they ate them because they tasted like food. So be aware of those types of things. Some gums have very strong scents. If an individual isn't allowed to chew gum for some reason, don't chew gum in front of them. Now, I will say, because of that thick saliva we talked about yesterday, the day before, chewing gum can be helpful for individuals with PWS. I don't have an issue with that. Where you want to be cautious is the artificial sweeteners that are in some gums can be triggering for hyperphagia. So being aware of that before you buy gum is just something to keep in mind. The other thing, Febreze makes a clean linen scented air freshener. And there was an individual I had supported who was in the hospital for a procedure. So while she was gone, we deep cleaned her apartment, had the carpets all shampooed, really, did some cleaning, some painting, all sorts of stuff, took advantage of it, and then sprayed some clean linen air freshener in before she came in. And the first thing she said when she walked through the door was, "It smells like cotton candy in here." So we threw the air freshener away. Did not smell that way to any of us, but it did for her, and that's triggering. So you may buy products that do not cross your mind as food, but somebody else may say it reminds them of, or it smells like. If that happens, just stop using them. So we talked about the skin picking and the bowel status already, but let's talk about pacing during meals and snacks and the right to refuse treatment and care. So people with PWS are at an increased risk of choking and also tend to eat fairly quickly. So pacing is recommended by the vast majority of speech therapists that work with individuals with PWS. But how we do that can either be done in a way that is respectful or a way that's not. And I encourage you to look at things like, rather than constantly saying, you need to put your fork down, you need to take a break. Are there some signals that you can work out with people? Can you gently put your hand on their wrist? Can you ask questions, get them engaged in a conversation so that they're forced to look up from their plate and talk with you and stop and take your break for a second? Find ways to do it that's more natural and respectful than what I hear described as mothering. Very often I hear from people with Prader-Willi syndrome that their staff is younger than they are and they mother them. They get to tell them what to do and how much that infuriates them. So let's find ways for staff to still be empowered to do their job. The reality is that they're responsible for some really scary things, for, preventing somebody from choking, for making sure that they take their medicine, that they're always safe, all of these things. That's a lot of responsibility. And we want them to be able to do all of those things. But let's teach them some ways to do it that are less abrasive. And the right to refuse treatment and care, this is one that tends to really upset people. But you and I have the right to say, I don't feel like taking my medicine today. Do I understand the risk if I don't take it? Absolutely. Do I know if I don't take my migraine medication that I might have a migraine tomorrow? Yep. I can make that decision because I know the risk. We need to help individuals with Prader-Willi syndrome understand the risk of refusing treatment. Lots of times they're refusing treatment and care just because they want to have some control over something in their lives. As a field, we're getting much, much better about allowing people to have more control. Allowing is probably not the right word. We are no longer taking control away from people the way that we used to. And that's great. But we also need to continue to educate people about those risks so that when they're refusing, they know what the consequences could be. If they're refusing to take a shower, what are the consequences? Well, you might stink. Your friend might not want to sit next to you. People may not want to go to the movies with you. Those are natural consequences. You can still choose to not take a shower, but know that that might be the result. So setting up people for success. So we talked about how we can have people involved in the meal planning process, but let's talk about those maybe who are not necessarily involved. How can we still give them a little bit more autonomy? And one of the ways is planning the menus well in advance with their input. So that doesn't necessarily mean write down teaspoons of seasonings or, half a cup of this and a quarter cup of that. What it means are, what are the foods you actually like? What are the foods you don't like? How do you like them cooked? Do you like your steak well done? Do you like it rare? Asking them those types of questions so that when you're building out a menu, you're bringing in the foods that people like rather than the foods that can be bought sometimes in bulk and cheaper, the foods that are easier to cook. And I think in my own personal experience in the residential world, those were the things we went to, the things that were easy to cook for a group of 5 and the 3 staff that were there, the things that I could buy on sale, because the reality is everybody's on a budget. Those things are important, but shouldn't be more important than making sure that we're incorporating people's likes and dislikes into that meal planning. The other thing is allow for pre-approved choices. So, some menus need to be really strict with that, half a cup of green beans or 3 ounces of chicken. And this certainly depends on the number of people who are living in each residence and the time that staff have to be preparing the meal. But can you instead make it a little bit broader? 3 ounces of a white meat, which means chicken, fish, or pork. Half a cup of a green vegetable, or half a cup of a vegetable. Doesn't necessarily need to be green. Now, most of the vegetables will have the same caloric amount, give or take, except for corn and peas. So, when you're doing these things, look at that so that, somebody's not able to substitute out a 50-calorie vegetable for a 100-calorie vegetable. But can you just build those into routines so that you are giving somebody a choice every time they sit at the table? They're now in control. They get to decide with your already pre-planned choices. They get to decide what they want to eat. Those of us who do not have somebody dictating what we eat every day of our lives, take this for granted. Community inclusion. So we talked about this. Walk side by side or behind, never in front. Allow people to speak for themselves. This comes up in the doctor's office a lot, where a doctor may look at the staff and talk with the staff rather than the individual. Don't answer their questions. Instead, respond, Bobby, you go ahead and answer that. Now, certainly there's some individuals who may not be able to answer or would prefer you to do the speaking for them. Encourage them to speak anyway, and then add in the details that perhaps the doctor needs. Engage people in conversation when you're out walking around and participating in events. If there is an exercise or some sort of physical activity component to somebody's day, please do it with them. Do not take somebody to the Planet Fitness and sit in the lounge chair watching them work out. Jump on the machines, work out with them. Participate in whatever they are doing, unless there's a reason you shouldn't. So if they join a soccer league and they're paying to play, you shouldn't be. You're there to be a ride. That's it. But anything that's open to the public that they're participating in, you as staff should also be participating in that. Again, that ID, keep your agency ID out of sight if you can. Question for you guys, and you can answer this in the chat as well. When's the best time to teach somebody skills, new skills that they need while they're in the community? Is it in the moment when they're doing something? Perhaps it's a money skill and they're cashing out, or is it some other time? What are your thoughts about this? In the moment or prior in the moment? Great, thank you. So let me tell you the feedback I got from an individual. And I was embarrassed that I hadn't thought about it. So he was attempting to make a transaction and was struggling to count the money. And there was a way that, so instead of, it was like $20 and change, and he had a 20, he had some change, and he had a $5 bill. but he was struggling to count the actual change to give it. And I intervened and said, hey, let me help you with this. Let's add this up. And I thought to myself, this is a great in the moment opportunity. And when we got in the car, he said to me, I can't believe you did that. You embarrassed me in front of him. And I was stunned. I felt terrible. I said, tell me more about that. Tell me more about what you're feeling. And he said, you made it obvious that you were my staff and not my friend when you were trying to show me how to count the change. So what I learned from this is all of those answers are correct. It could be in the moment, it could be prior, and it could be after. Depends on the person that you're working with and knowing them really well to know which. Now, I thought I knew this guy really well, and it isn't something that I thought would have upset him. So you may still run into situations where maybe your actions are embarrassing for them, will upset them. But like I said yesterday, we all make mistakes. So what I learned from that situation moving forward was anytime I was taking somebody shopping, I would say to them, here's a scenario. How do you want me to respond? And then I would take their lead from there. And we talked about this already, but allowing individuals to make transactions for themselves when they can, and that money can represent food. So a lot of people, and again, each state does this a little bit differently. Each organization does it differently. I live in New York, so we call house money petty cash, and the money that individuals have from their bank accounts and the cash that they keep on hand was called individual spending money. And a portion typically of their SSI would come as their spending money, and that would be locked in the safe. There were some individuals who also worked and received paychecks and carried a wallet where they were able to have a certain amount of cash on their person that did not need to be receipted back to us. So we all know, the finance people in the world want receipts for every single transaction, and that's great. It makes sense. It's business smart. It's not always practical. So what we would allow individuals to do, and we encouraged them to get receipts, but they didn't always have to. If they were able to have $10 unreceipted, the receipt would be one of those paper receipts where it says, Stacy signed out $10 cash from the safe to Bobby. And then Bobby would sign it and I would sign it. And that would be the receipt that allocated that $10 that was no longer in the safe. If they were able to bring us back receipts for how they spent that $10, it got stapled to it. And we certainly encouraged them to do that. But if they didn't, it was okay also. Not everybody could have that level of independence around money. Some people would automatically spend that money on food. Some people would not realize that perhaps somebody was taking advantage of them and they would give their money away. Again, this comes down to that informed choice. Some people are really generous, and when they see people in need, they want to help out how they can. And you and I get to make that decision. I see somebody struggling, I may want to give them $5 so they can grab a cup of coffee. I can make that decision. Can the person you're working with? And how have you documented whether they can or they cannot? New York has a money management assessment form that has to be used by everybody. There's no deviation. And there is a line on that form that says, how much money is this person allowed to have unreceipted? And what is the time frame? So for some people, it was $10 a day. For others, it was $10 a month. But that was on there, and they get reassessed at a minimum every 6 months. Now, the assessment wasn't necessarily super formal. if you're taking good data, and hopefully everyone is, you can look at your data and you can see. And then, maybe you, as the person doing the assessment, go on an outing with somebody and you see how they do. And you assess them in real time rather than sitting down at a table with Monopoly money doing an assessment. There's ways to do this, again, with the dignity and respect. Does anybody have any questions so far? Okay, let's go on then. Differences in respect and dignity. So, respect comes from the Latin word meaning to look back at. And dignity comes from the Latin word dignitas, meaning to be worthy. Acknowledging someone because of their abilities, qualities, and achievements is respect. Dignity is everyone has the right to be acknowledged for their inherent humanity and treated ethically. Respect is earned, dignity is given. Any questions about this? My hope is that we're treating everyone with respect and dignity. And that's it. How about Q&A? I am so sorry. This one was much shorter than I had intended.
So I actually have a question about tomorrow. I'm not going to be able to make the first half of it, and I realize you guys are recording it. So would I be able to get a hold of that video?
Yes. So after the recording occurs, I send the video to our marketing person. They do very minor edits around, me saying things like, we'll start in a few minutes. And then once they're done with it, which should be by Friday for all of them, I'm going to send them out to everyone who registered for each session.
Wonderful. Thank you.
You're so welcome. Does anybody have any other questions? Does anyone want to share a situation where perhaps they observed somebody being treated without dignity or respect? Don't be scared.
I did want to say, like today, my son is 38 years old, and I was going, and this is a really good reminder. I was going to choose a mattress, and I thought, well, I know the kind that he would like, and my son wouldn't give very much feedback and everything else. And I'm like, no, nope, you know what? I need to bring him along, and he needs to be a part of the process. And that will be in a couple hours.
Excellent.
So that's right there. Again, it's like, okay, I'm already thinking, oh, I know him so well that this is going to be the outcome. And I need to just kind of step back and say, hey, you know what? Regardless of what, at least he's part of that input of that process.
Yes, I love that. That's a great example of one of those small things that sometimes we take for granted.
Yes,
that we do for people without thinking, and it comes from such a good place.
Yeah.
There's no harm meant at all. Great job. Anyone else? How about a time where perhaps you have seen somebody being treated in a way that was so impressive to you that made you think for a second or recognize that staff and say, wow, they did a really great job at that?
I think anytime that that they're asked questions, to be a part of it, to encourage, to be a part of the discussion, that's awesome. That is really something. but it doesn't come natural. It, especially sometimes when you're so involved in their care, it's always thinking about it. It just doesn't
Yes,
seem to be a natural thing.
it doesn't. You know, one of the things that has come up when I was in the residential world with someone, and this wasn't specifically somebody with Prader-Willi syndrome, but it was somebody who required some assistance in the shower, and staff would set the water temperature to a temperature that was comfortable for them, but it was too cold for the
Oh,
individual.
yes.
And you know, for the staff, it was too hot if they made it hotter. So how do we work through that? And we found some ways, but those are little decisions, little things that we do that we don't think about. And honestly, lots of times people won't speak up.
Yeah. Yeah. Stacy, how did we regarding the because my son has just really extreme constipation,
Mm.
how can I do it in a way instead of saying, okay, TJ, how many bowel movements did you have today? How do I say it in a more respectful way?
So my first question is, can he track it himself? Is there a way for him to keep a log in the bathroom?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so then I would do that, where you don't even
Okay.
have to ask him.
Okay.
You could check the log and then that would tell you.
Great. That's okay. Thank you, Stacy.
You're welcome. Anyone else? Well, thank you guys for being here. Please feel free to reach out at any time, ask any questions, run scenarios by me. If there are particular situations that you would like to share that maybe we need to get consents for. We have done that in the past where we have had individuals and their family members sign off so that you could share the specific details to be able to get a better understanding of how to move forward with something. So that's absolutely something that we can do as well. And yes, you are so right, Joseph. They can be used with everyone, not just people with Prader-Willi syndrome. But thank you all. I appreciate you guys being here. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stacy. Bye.
Bye.